Hey Nate, how you doing?
Very good. How you doing, man?
Yeah, really good. I'm really excited to finally have you on the podcast. I've been waiting for a few weeks or so, but yeah, it's so good to finally have you on. And
We
it's kind
got
of timely
together.
as well because you just won Forbes 30 under 30, right? That's a pretty big achievement. How are you feeling off the back of that?
Oh my gosh. I'm not good with receiving awards. I don't. It's not my award. That's the thing. I mean, it's the team at Koala that do everything. I know that. So like, I feel a bit awkward. Um, accepting it. But I mean, it's obviously like so. I'm so chuffed with it. It's like really
Yeah, like
humbling.
we couldn't have timed this podcast any better, I feel, because we organized it before they even announced it. And literally, I think a
Yeah.
few days ago, they literally like announced it, and then like now you're on the podcast. So this is your first media interview pretty much since the announcement, I
Oh,
guess.
exclusive. How do you feel?
Exactly. I got the exclusive here, got your first reactions. It's good.
That's it.
But I think it'd be really good to, I guess, well, firstly, like people to know about a bit about you and Koala, but like I guess more profoundly, like we've never had any. I talked to you about this before we hit record, but we've never had anyone on the podcast before within this sort of industry or niche. So I kind of always get astounded whenever I find entrepreneurs like we've covered like 50 episodes now, but I still find people who are like in completely different industries, and it's really cool, especially young people as well. It's not like I can't find young people within that certain industry. Like there's always going to be a few people, a few game changers who are doing amazing stuff. And so you're doing exactly what I was just saying, but in prosthetics, which is amazing to see. So I think it would be great for people to find out more about, I guess, what is Koala basically.
Yeah, I mean, what Koala is now is it's so exciting, and really we just think of ourselves as a service that's here to support people with limb difference. So it's quite a fragmented community of people who've either been born without limbs or lost their limb, and we quite enjoy just being here for whatever they might need, whether they need some device to do something, and we have soft prosthetics that we can just send to them, like through the post, like clothes or like shoes. But other times it's people just need advice. They just need to like see, they people who've just lost their limb, they want to know what to expect and talk to someone who's been through it before. And because we're a community of people just like that, we can link them up. And so yeah, we have a range of services, but we're just here to help people with limb difference. And
Hmm.
it's you wait. I mean, every day is awesome. Like the amount of people you talk to and the heartwarming stories. That I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing all my time.
Yeah, yeah, it's so genuine to actually see because you obviously like have a massive passion towards this, and it's so nice to hear that. I think where I'd like to go with it is like I guess where did that passion start with? Like where did it actually like originate from? Because yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear.
I mean, I always get asked if I have like if I have like a personal connection, like if a family member. I mean, I don't have a family member with any limb difference. I have both my hands and both my legs. I mean, for me, it started because we started the whole sort of idea of doing prosthetics started back in university, um, in Imperial College, and we're four mechanical engineering nerds, and we just like the idea of you know building robots and making an Iron Man suit and all this kind of jazz, the standard stuff that you should be doing when you're in uni. Um, but really early on in the project to do this prosthetic, this low cost prosthetic, we met a guy who is my favorite person in the world, um, and we work together every day on this now. But Alex Lewis, and aside from traveling the world and generally being a legend and being a designer and a dad, he had limb loss. He's lost both of his arms and both of his legs, so he lives with prosthetics all day, every day, and just absolutely fell in love with the idea of just making something useful for him. So when we were at uni, we just wanted to make something that was useful for him because what he was asking for from his prosthetics was so different to what we'd heard or what we'd read in like journal articles and seen on TV, and
Mm.
which would lead you down the track of make things more complicated, make them look like your hands, look like your legs, make them all singing or dancing. Whereas he was just completely turned the thing on his head. He was saying, "Look, gents, I just want something that's
Mm,
really, really comfy because I'm wearing it all day. I just want something that's really, really easy to
yeah.
use. I just want something so that if I want a different one, like I want a blue one, or if I want to go play golf with it, I can go out and buy one myself. I don't have to beg someone for money."
Mm,
And those sounded like really easy problems,
yeah.
and that's what we sort of wanted to focus on. And just honestly just fell in love with the problem and trying to do something different in the area.
I'd love to kind of unpick that answer because it's really interesting what you just said there. Because just for like value for the audience, because what you've done there essentially is found your ideal customer and you've built a profile around them of what they want, what they don't want, why, what they're using it for already. You've built a very decent idea from basically day one of what your product will achieve and what like who will use it as well, who will, like, and I guess who will pay for it also. And then immediately as well, you know exactly what they're using already, what doesn't work for them. So I feel like already you're like miles ahead of a lot of other people who kind of see it and kind of do a lot of desk research, which is good initially,
Yeah,
but there's nothing like actually speaking to your end customer for sure. So, or end user, sorry, because it's just like always, yeah, it's always better validation in that sense. So I
yeah,
guess,
absolutely.
how do you feel like it might have been different for you if you didn't speak to him and just went down the road of, say, desk research? Like the product must have been like fundamentally so different from what it is now. Have you ever thought about
Well, I
that?
think funny enough. So the first, I had a really good. I'm running it back here. I go off on tangents, but I had a really, really good design technology teacher at high school, and I still talk to him now. As a class, we still get together when we're allowed to. Now obviously pandemic, but when we're allowed to,
Yeah.
and hang out, because the way he used to teach us just completely informed how I think about stuff. And he would always talk about fab design, and fab is features and benefits, FAB. And so he'd always be like, look, find out the features of something and find out what the benefit is. Because if it doesn't have a benefit, get rid of it. And what that
Mm,
process relies on fundamentally is talking to someone who uses the product. So you find your user. Like that's the first thing you do before you even put pen to paper. Talk to someone who's experiencing the problem. So it's just ingrained in how I kind of think, and I've really taken that for granted. He was an amazing teacher, um, and so I always feel like, and this happens now. I feel like part of your brain knows when you're solving a problem without being sure whether
mm,
it's a problem. I just really feel like part of your brain knows, and you get it from desk research. It's like you get the idea about what you're talking about, but you can't like taste it. It's missing
yeah.
something. Um, and we kind of had that at the start of the project to make prosthetics. I mean, we'd come with our own just ideas of what we wanted to make. Like we wanted to make something that looked like a hat. We wanted to make something
Mm,
that was like Terminator like and moved and was cool. And I was just like ingrained in our brains. And so we were lucky to talk to Alex really early on, but even then, what he was saying was different to us. So our brains immediately kind of like, he really means this. And so we spent like the first 9 months, we talked to him once, and then
mm.
spent 9 months making this prototype that was like hand shaped and had all these motors
So
and
not really kind
and
of listening to him in the first instance.
not honestly, humbly, really listening. We were listening to what we wanted to
Or I guess
hear,
molding his answers more towards what you already want.
and right into what we wanted to hear. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly
okay,
that.
okay.
And we came back after 9 months and had this horrible prototype. So like it was big and clunky, and essentially there were bits that we couldn't figure out. So I was in charge of the hand design, and I knew Alex wanted to. He just wanted to hold a pen. That's what he'd said, and I decided the best way to do it was to make a articulated hand. And I still couldn't get it to quite grasp pen with 5 individually movable digits because
Mm,
a hand is friggin' insane bit of technology. And so what I just bought, I
yeah.
bought a pack of 50 pence pen clips off of Amazon and just put a little plastic pen clip on the palm. You clip the pen in, and then the fingers closed around it. And then the other bit we couldn't figure out was how to attach the hand to him. We couldn't make the sockets, and traditional sockets like carbon fiber and they're rigid. We didn't know how to do that. So we just got like fabric, sewed it into a bag shape, like a vague arm shape, and just tied it onto him. Anyway, so this is after 9 months of working, and he tried it on. Was showing me everything, and he's like, "Oh my god, I love this." And we're like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, I love this." this fabric socket is so comfortable, and I love this pen clip. And I was like, but Alex, look at my articulated hand. Look at all the intricate ways it moves. And he's like, yeah, I don't need any of that. I literally don't need any of that. Those two elements that took you a combined time of about 20 minutes are the best things here. And that just reaffirmed everything that you kind
That's
of
really
think about
crazy.
using. It's like, just listen to what they say. And now it's a joy. I love talking to people and letting them completely destroy my assumptions, because then you know that they're genuine, and it's so much
Mm.
fun.
That's so interesting that that was the journey that you went down, I guess. Yeah, because you could have easily, I guess, not had Alex there and just like built a product. I guess gone even further down, articulating hand. You could have gone even further. Technology tried to make the articulating hand even better, spending more
Yeah,
time, money, like whatever. But it's something that I guess people didn't want. And that goes for a lot of other businesses as well, a lot of other startups that people, I mean, for people listening, um, don't spend ages like doing things if you have no end customer or end problem in your actual like in your vision.
yeah.
So yeah, crazy interesting that was the sort of like path you went down. Have you ever thought about what if Alex wasn't there at all? Like if you never met him?
I mean, there's no way we would have had the support to be able to get this far. I wouldn't still be doing it now. I'd be
Mm,
in a regular 9 to 5 job. It wouldn't have had the traction to get here. Because for a year out of uni, we essentially tried that, and Alex wasn't involved day to day because he was living his own life and had his stuff to do. And so we kind of, again, we took what we thought we understood, and we set up this project to make the prosthetic components and just make them, and then we thought we'd put them online and just sell them.
mm,
And we hadn't properly tested, like, or really spoken to users about how they wanted to interact with their prosthetics or just their limb difference in general. And so until the end of 2019, where we had this like pretty formed product, we thought that we were going to list on the internet, and we're getting all this feedback from people. It's the first time we tested it on a large scale. And they said, actually, yeah, these prosthetics are cool, but I mean, a prosthetic is one part of my life. And like, if I'm going to have to keep buying these when my kid's growing and all this stuff, I don't know if that's like, I don't know if it's going to work. And so we thought we had this
mm,
business idea that was nailed down. And still, this was fairly recently, we were like, oh, that's not quite it. And that's where Koalaa was born, where we realized, okay, it's a holistic service. It's people that we're helping. A
mm,
prosthetic is one part of their journey, and it's one thing that we can offer, but it's people. And it's also that also coincided when I went back to Alex and said, Alex, you know what? This thing wasn't working. What should we do? How do we do it? And that was March last year when we set up Koala as the brand. And since then it's flown. It's literally night and day. As soon as we recognized the first port of call, let's just sit down with our quote unquote customer, but our user, our partner, and ask them what they need, and then use our skills as designers or whatever to make that. It's when we've taken off and completely rocketed. I think the pandemic's helped, but I mean,
mm,
that's, it's been night and day difference. So I think without you use at the start, without Alex, it was doomed to failure. I think well,
mm.
I think things are. If they don't have a need, they're probably doomed to failure. It's just a question of how long.
Mm, yeah. How did that whole process of you kind of sitting down with customers actually start though? Because I guess so you went from like testing this initial sort of product with Alex, and then you moved on to trying to sell online to a lot of a lot like, opening up to people. But I guess what was the sort of like turning point? What made you think, well, firstly, this isn't working, and secondly, what is our way of getting out of this? Like, because a lot of people will see that or like see, maybe things weren't selling as well. They maybe think, okay, we got the wrong distribution channel. We're selling on
Mm,
the wrong thing. We have to go through different channels, such as selling directly to the NHS, for instance. That's what probably a lot of competitors do to
mhm.
within this market. So I guess how did you kind of pinpoint that this was the problem, and how did you kind of like get out of it?
I think it comes back to I mean, it's so easy to get like high on your own supply and think the solution you're making is awesome.
Mm,
But again, I think on the flip side of that, I actually find it more enjoyable to have someone reveal to you how like foolish an idea was. Like to me, that's really valuable when someone's like, "Oh, that obviously won't work because of this," and you're like, "Oh my god, thank you!" Like that's
mm,
so that's enjoyable, and that like one that it makes people feel comfortable to tell you if you're missing something, because very often your friends and family and your close people close to you don't want to tell you stuff that might upset you. But the other thing is just going back to what we were saying about like the conversations we were having. And so when we left uni, some of the first people who helped us find users to try out stuff were limb loss charities. And we went back to them at the start of like, end of February, end of January, and sort of asked them like, okay, how do we, what are your guys' challenges? What do you hear from your community? Because charities are going to see a more broader spread of people than us as at the time just
mm,
making prosthetics. And they were saying things like, well, people are confused. They don't know what the right prosthetic for them is. They don't know whether they even need it in the first place. They also don't have any uses for it. They don't know other people who use them. They're sort of like this. We're just hearing from all these different corners that like there's a lack of information and a lack of connectivity in the limb loss community in general. We're just hearing this. It's sort of like it's hard to
yeah.
pinpoint when it exactly. I think just having the blinkers taken off. We just come back from this test of having the prosthetic that we thought was done, and people be like, I'm not that jazzed about it. So you're kind of like in this headspace where you're like, okay, let's forget all that. Let's just open mind. What is actually the problem? And hearing that it's about feeling supported. And then a pandemic happened, and we were getting direct emails from people around the world saying, my limb center's shut. I can't access XYZ support. And realizing like, right, this is the acute need. And
Mm,
actually a prosthetic is one part of that need that we already know how to do, but there are these other parts as well. And the penny kind of dropped where it's actually what what many people in limb different community are lacking are just someone open to talk to that doesn't have an axe to grind and that have an open mind to try and solve their problems. And that's exactly what we are. And so that's how we sort of
mm,
restructured and set up. And then once you see that people are coming to you without you doing any marketing, any whatever, it's just word of mouth, and people are just coming to get to interact with you as much as they can. That sort of is like a feedback loop of whatever we're doing is working. And doing a
mm.
service is hard because it's hard to nail down and define it clearly. But as the years gone on, it becomes more and more obvious what you do that helps people, and and so it was that. And it sometimes, sometimes it just takes very, not bad things, but like challenging
No,
things to
just like
happen.
yeah, just like differences to what normally
Pandemic.
happens. But yeah,
You just sit down and be like, right,
but
I've gone wrong somewhere. Where have I gone wrong?
yeah, I think it would be really cool to kind of, I guess, focus a bit on that business model side because you mentioned how, I guess, prosthetics were your main focus, when you
Mm.
first started and to an extent, like before, I guess, pre-pandemic. I don't know, you've only been around for like a year, so I don't think it'll be that long. um, but yeah, but like maybe at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think how have you kind of like what is the structure of the business now going from prosthetics only to I guess more a holistic model where it's more built around, I guess all problems around the prosthetic or, limbless community.
It's it's a tough thing to cost, and that's what we found. And so we find it works easiest when we explain it to people because there's say maybe four main ways that someone can pay for prosthetic services. So that when I say that, I mean that includes the device itself and the materials that goes into making that device, but also the initial traditionally you have a consultation to with doctors and clinicians to
Mm,
figure out what that patient might need. Then there's a period where they go away, look at all the devices they have, match it to the right person. Then there's follow up, there's fitting, and then there's checking back in 6 months, a year, whatever. So there's all the running services. But what we kind of realized in that in pretty much any country around the world, there's only like three or four ways that that gets paid for. Either like you're in the UK and you've got a centralized healthcare system that will pay for it, or you're somewhere like America where you have lots of insurance that will pay for it, you have insurance cover. There's not really anywhere currently, but there's no reason that someone couldn't pay for it themselves. Like when you buy your
Mm.
own glasses frames, and then you have
Wait,
like
before you move on, let's just say quickly that the prosthetic that you showed me before we hit record, how much was it? Just so people understand why it's not very easy for them to buy it outright themselves.
what is actually it's so good because I mean it's something that people don't realize, especially in the UK
I
because we have
didn't
the
I
NHS.
I didn't know this. So like this is like pretty, yeah. I had no idea.
So this prosthetic I'm holding here, so like this is like a traditional, it's a rigid kind of prosthetic, and it's got like a metal hook on the end. And this is like a state of the art one that has all the electronics, the quote unquote brain controlled ones that you'd see on on telly on Good Morning Britain or whatever. But
Mm.
this arm is when I ask people to guess, it's normally like, okay, is it £1,000, £2,000?
I
This
said 500, I think, before we hit record.
500 quid. Yeah, you were looking for a
Yeah,
bargain.
I said
This
500 pounds, yeah.
this arm is £25,000.
Yeah.
That's like an
It's pretty
e-boss
mental,
car.
yeah. For
It's like
people
an
for
high
people
end
listening on Apple Podcasts or
Lamborghini.
Spotify or wherever, you can watch the like full conversation with Nate on YouTube now, and you can see like what he's talking about. This like prosthetic arm that he's holding up right now is
Yeah, you're
25
probably
grand, which
imagining
is
it's
like
like,
mental to
oh,
me.
25 crate. It must be like bejeweled, and it must be made of
Yeah,
gold, and it
it's
must
got
have
diamonds on
like
it.
go see what it looks like, because it's not. It's very much a Captain Hook kind of thing. Um, and so that's why you can't just go online and buy them typically. So again, government, insurance, you happen to be a millionaire, you can pay it yourself, or maybe there's a charity that will sponsor it for you. The easiest of those that we just started talking to, because they're set up by like-minded people like us that just want to, be useful and help, were the charities. And so we went to the charities and we're just having conversations. And they essentially said, like, look, I mean, we don't normally fund prosthetics because we'd have to pick our favorite member, do all of our
Mm,
fundraising over the year and just pick them. But they're saying, like, what would it take with, koala sleeves and tools? Uh, what would it take to fund every child in the UK? And we're like, well, it would cost this much. It cost 1/50th of the of the price of traditionally. And this coincided with the pandemic when charities can't really fundraise over events because people aren't allowed to go meet up. And so they're like, holy hell, well, we can. What if we pulled together and just as a consortium, as a group, fundraised around these? And so we'll fundraise, and then for the funds that come in, you provide the service to the people. So include everything, include the fitting, the matching, and the components, and the follow up, and just look after this person. Um, and they got that whole like holistic approach, that holistic service, and that was where we started, and that gave us I guess the evidence base, because we were doing like 10, 20, 40 people with them, to go to NHS
mm,
clinics and say, look, we're already doing this, and we know for a fact that NHS clinics were like really struggling, especially when people couldn't travel, and we're saying, can we help you? And having evidence base, one or two of them, and now we've got like several dozen that say yes, now we can help, and sort of built up the ladders. So we're only a year old, but the next places we're looking are, now we've got even more evidence base to go to insurance companies and to go to the government, and just take that stepping stone approach. But it all started, again, it just came back to, it all started with finding people who are super close to the users, and that was charities,
mm.
and just asking them, what do you think we should do? And as soon as we framed the question the right way, so what do people really want and what are they asking you for, they told us the answer that was like, oh, we can do that, and it sort of built up from there.
That's really interesting. So I guess like about your product, would you say, or about your service as it were, um, what would you say you're kind of like competing on with, I guess, everyone else? Because I mean, cost is like a big thing that you probably are competing on, but as you said, like there's comfort as well. So I guess like what are the kind of differences, main differences you'd say between like yourselves and I guess what I'm trying to say basically is, why hasn't anyone done this before?
Oh, yeah. I don't know the honest answer. I have suspicions that have formed over while the time we've been doing it. I mean, so like for context, ours are made like clothes. So ours are like soft and flexible, and they're like 1/20th of the weight, and then we just have different tools that clip on and clip
Yeah,
off,
that looks
and
really
it's very
cool.
simple. And it's something that you buy like clothing. You just pop it in the post and send it to you, so you don't need to go to a clinic. You don't need to do these things that are hard to do during a pandemic. So, um, or that are hard to do if you're in a remote part of the planet. You know, you don't live near a clinic.
They look cooler as well. Like the other ones seemed a bit like clunky.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, this is what me and Alex talk about a lot, where it's, you know, you're wearing these things. So to
Mm,
us, they're less like medical devices. They're more like functional clothing, you know, and it's a big part of, you could take the medical route, so it's a big part of like psychology and just your, you know, your mental well-being, to feel confident in yourself. But also like, just there's just an angle of like things that should look cool. And it's very important for kids as well. Parents want their child, if they're going to school with limb difference, like they're saying, we want to change that first conversation from the other kids being kids and saying, oh, what's wrong with your arm, to them saying like, oh, that's so cool, what are you wearing, where do I get one, you know? So it's all different kind of elements of it. But I've gone off a tangent. I've forgotten your original question. I'm sorry.
why hasn't anyone done this before? Is the original
Why has no
question.
one done it? I think I think the first thing is there's a lack of people looking at it. I think it's such a niche industry. And I think people get into it the way we got into it, where we thought prosthetics was sorted, and we saw what was on TV, and we saw the glitzy glamorous stuff, and we saw the journal articles about add sensors here, add motors here, this, that, this.
Mm,
And I think most people get distracted by that. Engineers, good people, smart people, and they get so far down the process that when they actually talk to a user, and the user's saying, "Can I have this completely different thing?" it's a bit too late to switch track. Whereas we just happened to do that the first step, and got taken down this path because we had no prior assumptions other than
yeah.
what users were telling us. Um, and I think also, I mean, prosthetics industry is old. Like the companies that do them were founded before the NHS, like before the war, before both wars. And they're so huge. There's two massive companies in the industry. They don't really have the incentive to change because they're, you know,
Yeah. If they're
doing
making
fine.
profits, then why change?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing absolutely fine.
But like, do you feel like, because we've had someone on the podcast before where she's making like an app for like fitness, but specifically tailored towards disabled people,
Mhm.
and she was saying how, like, again, I asked her the same thing. Why hasn't anyone done this before? It seems like a, something that needs to happen. It seems like a logical thing. You got tons of fitness apps, but then they're kind of forgetting about the disabled, and it's like, why?
Yeah.
So I think a question I'd love to pose to you, having been in this industry for a year, more than a year now, do you feel like I guess, the disabled community as a whole is very underrepresented with the products and startups that are coming out? Because like that's the sort of message she was coming out with. What do you think?
Oh, the Alex is amazing to talk about this. So he's an interior designer, and his pet peeve. So he's in a wheelchair and he's lost both of his arms. His pet peeve is that any product made for quote unquote disabled people, any aid, it looks like an aid, and it's designed with the mindset
Mm,
of this person is broken. I'm going to fix them, and it's a mentality that if you do that, you're really limited in what you can get out of it. Whereas, and we find it with prosthetics that just doesn't fly, because if people have lost their limb and have lived for a few years, humans are so resilient, they're fine. They've figured out a way to do stuff with their stump. And for kids who have been born without a limb, they've never lost anything. They haven't known anything. So they're fine too. So it, there's nothing I can do to quote unquote fix people. They're absolutely fine. What does fly is looking at it like, what new exciting things can we do together? Because that takes you down a completely different path. And I just think it's interesting that all the products made for disabilities are normally, obviously, you know, there are exceptions, but they're normally made by people who don't have that disability. And it seems obvious to me that if you ask people who do live with, you know, who are differently abled in that way, they would have already thought about a really
Mm.
intuitive, interesting solution that hasn't been done before. Um, and I think that's
She
the
was
exciting part.
disabled at this fact. Like her name's Pravjoth. She's got cerebral palsy. That's why she found it really difficult. So it came out of a problem that she's had. So
That
and
is
she was saying like it's just an underrepresented bit of
literally
like the
that. And
demographic.
I'm going to go listen to that podcast right now because I bet she would have had so many just like seemingly
Episode
really obvious insights
18?
that no
Is it
one else.
18?
Episode 18. I'm going to get
Maybe.
on.
I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
I'll go with it. But
But
that's the thing.
Pravjoth Gill, if anyone's interested, like if you search back, it's quite an old one, but it's a good one. It's one of my like highest played. It's really good.
I think that's the thing, exciting thing, and I see more and more cool health tech things for that community. But it is one of those things where I guess you need to see more of it to know that it's a problem. I, as an engineer, didn't appreciate that there were lots of unsolved problems in that kind of industry, and it's only by a chance meeting with Alex that you see a
Yeah.
gaping one. And I think there's probably hundreds. So I hope more and more people look at it. To be honest.
Mm. Well, I hope like from listening to this podcast, a lot of young people do listen to this podcast, and I hope they found inspiration from you to maybe go into this market and solve because there's so many problems, as you say, like there's so many, I guess, blind
That's
spots
accurate.
for a lot of people. That's like this doesn't really exist for me, so why should I fix it? When in actual fact, like it's huge. So, and again, like going back to the competitors or the people in the market at the moment, a lot of these players a lot of the players that are already competing, they've been around for decades, and someone has to disrupt them. And if that someone, I mean, that could be a young person, that could be anyone. So yeah, I really hope that someone listening will probably like get inspiration from you and kind of do a similar thing to what you're doing because Koala seems like it is, it's an incredible business that you started. So yeah, massive credit to you, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, no pleasure.
How can people stay in touch with you, stay in touch with Koala in the meantime, going forward? Because I'm sure a lot of people want to check it out.
Oh, I mean, well, we're actually partnered with a lot of those charities I mentioned earlier, Douglas Bader Foundation, Reach, um, to run what we call Project Limitless to raise funds to give every child in the UK a prosthetic limb for free, which is just so
Mm,
cool to be a part of.
yeah.
So I'd encourage anyone if they fancy, giving 50p or a tether and helping a child who couldn't get one otherwise get an arm, go to our website www.yourkoala with that's koala with two A's at the end for reasons.com / project limitless and follow the links. And if not, just check it out and see the cool stuff we're doing. But no,
Yeah.
pleasure. That'd be lovely.
Cool. I hope you had a good time on the podcast. Yeah, it was such a good
So,
episode. Really inspired myself. So I really hope a lot of people got inspiration as well.
oh, pleasure, Sid. No, thank you so much for having me.
Cool. See you later, Nate. Thank you so much.
Cheers, man. Speak soon.